Here on the Kenyan coast, just a few kilometers from the historic port of Mombasa, a quiet transformation is taking shape. It won't make headlines around the world, but for millions of families across East Africa, what happens here will help determine something as basic as whether they can afford to cook dinner tonight. This is Dongo Kundu, a special economic zone carved out of the coastline south of Mombasa. And rising from its 30-acre site are 12 enormous spherical steel tanks gleaming in the equatorial sun. They are, in essence, giant pressure vessels, built to hold liquefied petroleum gas, the fuel that powers stoves in kitchens from Nairobi to Kampala. Engineers here are putting the final touches on what will become East Africa's largest LPG storage terminal. A project years in the making, and one that could quietly reshape the economics of energy across an entire region. To understand why this matters, you have to go back to how cooking gas actually reaches an East African household. It is not produced locally in any meaningful quantity. It arrives by sea, carried in vast tankers that cross the Indian Ocean from producers in the Gulf and beyond. But those tankers cannot simply pull up to any jetty and unload. They require highly specialized infrastructure, deep water berths, pressurized storage, and pipeline networks capable of handling a highly flammable product safely. For years, only a small number of facilities along Kenya's coast could do this job. And that scarcity mattered enormously. Whoever controlled those few entry points effectively controlled the terms on which the rest of the country accessed its cooking fuel. It's a pattern seen again and again in energy markets around the world. Control doesn't always come from owning oil fields or gas reserves. Increasingly, it comes from owning the infrastructure, the ports, the pipelines, the storage tanks that stand between supply and the people who need it. And in Kenya, industry figures suggest that as recently as this year, just 2 companies controlled the overwhelming majority, something in the region of 98% of the country's LPG import and storage capacity. For any new entrant hoping to compete, that concentration made the market almost impossible to break into. Enter Taifa Gas. The company is led by the Tanzanian businessman Rostam Aziz, already a dominant player in Tanzania's own gas market, and the terminal, now nearing completion at Dongo Kundu, represents his most ambitious move yet. The numbers are striking. An investment in the region of 130 million US dollars, roughly 16 billion Kenyan shillings. A storage capacity of 30,000 metric tons, with room to expand to 45,000. And crucially, a dedicated pipeline, part undersea, part over land, running some 3.5 kilometers to connect directly with an existing oil terminal berth, allowing large vessels to unload without relying on infrastructure owned by rival firms. President William Ruto broke ground on the project back in February 2023, with government officials speaking optimistically about breaking a long-standing monopoly and turning Mombasa into a logistics hub for the wider region. But the path from groundbreaking to completion has been anything but smooth. Not long after construction began, local residents raised objections. Concerns about the clearing of trees, about potential harm to the surrounding marine environment, about whether proper safeguards had been put in place. Those concerns found their way into Kenya's Environment and Land Court, and for a period, work on the site slowed considerably while judges weighed the arguments. It wasn't until late in 2025 that a ruling finally cleared the legal path forward, allowing construction to resume in earnest. Since then, progress has been rapid. By the middle of this year, the spherical tanks were largely complete, and engineers had moved into a critical phase of testing, subjecting the structures to hydrostatic pressure to ensure they can safely contain gas under extreme conditions. Inspectors from Kenya's energy regulator and its Bureau of Standards have been on site throughout. A reminder that a facility storing this much pressurized, flammable material carries real safety stakes, not just commercial ones. Officials now expect commissioning within the coming months, positioning Taifa Gas to become the first major investor to begin operations inside the Dongo Kundu zone. There is, too, a financial arrangement worth noting, one that illustrates how directly the Kenyan state has bound itself to this project's success. The land beneath the terminal remains in public hands, leased to Taifa Gas under a long-term agreement that will bring the government a steady monthly income, understood to run into the tens of millions of shillings, translating to roughly 270 million shillings a year. This is not simply a foreign company building on Kenyan soil. It is a partnership, with the state holding a direct financial interest in seeing the terminal succeed. But step back from the tanks and the testing schedules, and the real significance of this project becomes clearer. Mombasa is not simply a Kenyan port. It is a gateway for a vast stretch of the African interior. Landlocked nations, Uganda, Rwanda, Burundi, South Sudan, and parts of the Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo depend on this coastline for fuel and goods that then travel hundreds of kilometers further inland along Kenya's northern corridor. A bottleneck here doesn't just affect Kenyan consumers, it sends costs rippling across borders. And in theory, greater capacity and competition here could ease those pressures for the whole region, though officials are careful to note that any benefit to neighboring markets will depend on transport links, demand, and cross-border arrangements that remain, for now, largely untested. It would be a mistake, though, to assume that a bigger terminal automatically means cheaper gas for the family cooking dinner tonight. Analysts caution that building storage capacity solves only the first link in a much longer chain. What happens after the ship docks, how gas is trucked, priced, and distributed to towns and villages depends on a web of businesses and regulations that a single terminal cannot change overnight. Breaking a market's grip is rarely instantaneous. It tends to happen gradually, as new competition forces established players to adjust. Even so, something larger is unfolding here than the story of one terminal. Across Africa, and indeed across much of the developing world, a shift is underway in how power over energy markets is understood. It is no longer enough to control the resource itself. Increasingly, what matters is control over the routes, the ports, the pipelines, and the storage facilities that move that resource from where it is produced to where it is needed. Taifa Gas is betting that by building an alternative gateway here at Dongo Kundu, it can loosen a grip on Kenya's cooking gas market that has held firm for years. Whether that bet pays off, in lower prices, in steadier supply, in real competition, will only become clear once gas begins flowing through these tanks at scale. For now, on this stretch of Kenyan coastline, a new gateway is opening. And as history in this region has shown time and again, when a new route challenges an old monopoly, the balance of power rarely stays the same for long.